talking about how to find the right equilibrium for your team, finding processes that help empower engineers without bogging them down and getting in the way of delivering value to your customers. There's going to be a lot of detail in these slides. I have screenshots of our PRD templates, tech spec templates, so there's a QR code here if you want to follow along on these slides either now or after the talk. So first, to talk a little bit about why process is good. Why are we even here having this conversation? It can be really helpful in improving efficiency for your team, making sure that clear goals and expectations are set up front, and that once you get into the work on a project, a ticket, whatever it might be, engineers are able to focus and move forward without running into a bunch of bottlenecks, having to deal with downtime or other issues in between picking up the work that they're tackling. It can help you make sure that you're prioritizing the right things because you accurately understand what it's going to take to deliver on the task at hand, so that you can sort of value, okay, what is the time investment versus the impact of this project. It can also be really rewarding for people to have clear goals and expectations and achieve those goals and feel like you're making good forward progress week to week, but also overall in your career as you continue to sort of up level and take on bigger projects and the like. Can also help with just predictability, making sure you're getting ahead of all those cross-team dependencies, giving good sort of clarity and context to teams across your organization that might need to know, when is this feature going to ship and how do I need to act accordingly? So how much process is right for your team? I can't tell you that. Only you can know that. There's some things that you can think about and some questions to ask yourself to sort of evaluate, the context and culture within which you're operating. That's going to really dictate what is the right sort of process for where you're at, the type of product you're working on, the size of your team, the complexity of your org. All of those things are going to drastically impact how much process and what kind of process is going to be valuable. So a lot of this comes down to kind of the culture and context in which you're operating, and we'll talk through some examples of how we do this, and there might be some good lessons in there for you, but only you can know sort of, what is that right balance to find. So some signs that you might need more process. This maybe feels counterintuitive. I feel like process is often a scary word that people get annoyed with, but the right amount of process can be really empowering and unlock a lot of velocity for your team. So here are some signs that you actually might need to invest in more process. Lots of time, week to week is going into planning, and it actually might be a better upfront investment to spend more time getting ahead of sort of the plans, either for a week, month, quarter, whatever it might be, so that you're having to spend less time on that on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. Another common symptom is that teams are working really hard, but they're just not delivering on sort of the quantity of work that you would expect. This might be because they're spending a bunch of time on sort of false starts, getting a project to 80%, and then priorities change and they start on a new one, right? So making sure that time is being spent efficiently and effectively. Managing dependencies can start to get challenging. You're having to wait significant time to get resources from another team or something like that, and having more sort of upfront process will help you get ahead of those things and make sure that teams are working in sync on things. And then the last one is that it can feel like your team is operating like a LIFO queue, just like the either squeakiest wheel or the last thing that's coming in is the thing that's often getting prioritized. On the flip side, what are some signs that you might need less process, and that might actually accelerate the work that you're doing on your team? If engineers are spending more than an hour, give or take, again, this might look different for different teams, in regular planning meetings, it's a lot of time that engineers are spending planning versus executing. Obviously, when you're doing things like quarterly planning or something like that, this number might go up. What if planning a project is consistently taking way longer than actually executing on it? Do you spend so much time, writing really in the weeds tech specs and getting every single potential risk out of the way and perfectly estimating to the point that that ends up just taking way longer? That might mean that you could get to an 80–90% solution much more quickly and spend more of that valuable time actually executing on the project. Another one is that you're too good at building the roadmap. This probably means that you're spending too much time on getting it so perfect, or there's not enough flexibility to be able to adjust. Things change. You need to be able to react to new inputs, new things that are coming up, and so making sure that you're striking that right balance of building a good roadmap that you can be focused on, but adapting as needed. Another one is that hitting metrics is celebrated more than the value that's actually being delivered to customers. Do you just really care about what your burn down rate looks like and exactly how well you're estimating timelines for projects in a way that starts to focus more on the process itself versus the actual output of the work that you're doing? And then I think the last one here is really critical, and one of the, I think, things that getting process right can really unlock is making sure that engineers are feeling empowered to move their projects forward and don't feel like they're running into red tape constantly or having to wrangle so many different stakeholders just to move something forward. So now I'm going to dive in a little bit to how we at Stytch plan across our EPD teams. For a little bit of context on sort of our organization and who we are, we're about 65-person company with a little over half of that on the EPD team, about 30 engineers. So we're small, but big enough that we have different teams working on different areas and need some amount of process. So we try and be agile, but we also try and be really intentional with how we're spending our time. You'll see we have a very doc-heavy culture. We're a hybrid team, and so I think that's something that we've emphasized to make sure that there's good sort of ability to have async collaboration and get into the weeds on what we're building in a way that doesn't rely on just tapping someone on a shoulder, since we need to be doing this in a more async way. So here's our sort of life cycle of a project. And this is a common interface that all of the EPD teams are working within. Different projects might look a little bit different, and different teams will have a lot of freedom to kind of figure out how they do week-to-week planning. So these are sort of the common things that we have our teams work with, and how they get to these outputs is totally up to them, and it can vary even project to project. We try and give a lot of sort of flexibility and ownership to project leads to define what works for them and that project, the team that's working on it, etc. So our sort of step 0 is a one-pager. We focus a lot on making sure that there's good alignment on sort of the goals and motivations for a project. We find that spending more of that time up front can help make sure that people really understand what they're there to do and make those decisions, feel empowered to sort of understand the context within which they're working. So we spend more time kind of upfront on getting that sort of alignment. We typically use our one-pagers most during quarterly planning to kind of figure out, okay, what are some of the possible solutions that we could consider here? What is the complexity of those different solutions, and what does that mean in terms of the time commitment, both in terms of number of weeks that we might be dedicating to this, but also how many engineers might we want to staff on this? And we use that to kind of put together our picture for what the quarter is going to look like, so that we can do what we call tiling, to basically say, okay, these two engineers are going to work on this project. It's going to take X amount of time. How do we sort of piece all of the puzzle pieces together there? So this is what our one-pager template looks like. Really high level. There's a little bit of sort of timeline estimation in here, but it's meant to be very sort of double click on like t-shirt sizing. So it's not meant to be just like, small, medium, large. This is where we go one step deeper to say, okay, roughly how many weeks do we think this is going to take? Our next stage is starting to put together the project brief. So this happens when the project is actually going to kick off. So we have a project team, we know who's going to be working on this, and we want to make sure that we get that sort of alignment of like, what are these goals for this project? What are the things that we still don't know that we need to dig into before we can get to writing a tech spec, for example. So oftentimes this is something that our product team is owning, but it can be anyone that's sort of like acting as that DRI. So for more platform teams, that might be an engineer that's working on putting this together. The second stage of this is sort of a live review and kickoff of the project brief. So just getting everyone in the same room, making sure that if people have any open questions, they're able to talk through those, uncover any of those additional things that we might want to dig into. This is sort of like the official project team formation, making sure that we have the right sort of like Slack channel set up, all of that. You'll see that we have a lot of sort of like sharing out to Slack in here, and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of like the why behind that at the end, but focus a lot on making sure that those updates are getting sent out so that people can have context, can dive in, can read through a doc, give comments if it might be applicable to work that they're doing. So this is what our project brief looks like. It's pretty lightweight, and sometimes this will kind of evolve into a PRD. So some of the things in here are meant to be built upon, but just sort of that initial context setting, alignment on motivations, and making sure that if there are any sort of like constraints or assumptions that we need to be thinking about, that those are really top of mind for people. Next step is our PRD. So product is often the one putting this together. This goes into really detailed product requirements for exactly what we're trying to build and what that experience should look like for our customers, their end users, whoever it might be that's impacted. So this is a little bit of what our PRD template looks like. You'll see there's kind of that like realignment on requirements and goals, but then there's a lot of detail that we will go into on some of the key decisions that we're making, what are the choices that we're deciding to make, and this is really valuable then to be able to go back to and say, oh, this is why a certain thing is the way that it is. You can sort of like see some of that history here. And go into depth on user stories, detailed product requirements, all of those things. Next stage is our tech spec. We really prioritize specs for our projects and spend probably more upfront time on this than I think is common, and really go into detail, sort of like building out the project plan in the spec phase so that once we go to actually execute on it, we kind of have that plan already built, and it's really fast to basically transfer that into linear for the week-to-week project management that we're doing. So we have a template that I'll share some of in a moment, and we have a lot of stuff in there to just help get people thinking about the things that they might need to consider for a project, things like metrics, observability, all of those things that you want to think through when you're building out a new feature. We have a pretty sort of like thoughtful review process as well, where we try and be really intentional with who we're tagging and giving them context on that. I think this is something that can be really valuable, especially when you're bringing in maybe a few different people to give feedback on a specific area that they're an expert in. Giving them that context so that they can really hone in on that and focus on it and give higher quality feedback versus maybe having to feel overwhelmed or be like, why am I reviewing this when all these other people are reviewing it? That can help bring sort of some context and clarity to people. So this is sort of the level setting for our spec, how we do the sign-off process, we'll create tickets for this as well so that people can track that and be reminded that this is something that's on their plate for a given week and not lose track of the importance of reviewing a spec. We'll link all of the relevant things. At this point, we have a lot of different docs, and so making sure that you're able to easily access those so that you don't have to go digging for the context that's already been produced. This is a little bit more sort of like in the weeds on some of the pieces of our tech spec template. We are primarily an API company, and so we have a lot of emphasis on kind of like API design and data modeling, making sure that we're thinking about things like the database implications, migrations, all of that when we're building out new features. So this might not be relevant for your team, depending on what you work on, but this is a little bit of sort of a view into just like how specific we'll get with some of the work in the tech spec. The last part of the spec is doing really in-depth sort of like project planning. So estimating the project, coming up with really clear milestones, and getting into kind of like that story point estimation. We try and like strike the right balance here of making sure that we understand what we're getting into. We have a good sort of like estimate of what the project's going to look like, but also try not to spend too much time getting that estimation 100% perfectly right. We want to use it as like directionally helpful, but don't want it to feel too burdensome that it has to be so precise that you can't get any of this wrong. So this is a little bit of what this looks like and how we sort of think about calculating what the time investment is going to be. How much of this is parallelizable? How many engineers are we going to have on this? Where can we sort of like have those multiple engineers working versus what maybe needs to be done sequentially? Then we get into implementation. So we have this whole project plan built. We have, in many cases, like the API is fully designed. We really know kind of like what we're going to execute against. Implementation then becomes a lot more sort of like focused, heads down time of just building the thing. We try and make sure that as much as we can, we're getting ahead of things like bigger architecture decisions or things that might end up spiraling into a very long PR review if we hadn't gotten that alignment up front. So we try not to be making like too many critical decisions throughout the implementation phase. And if we find that we missed something, because that's obviously going to happen, we try and pull up and make sure that we're getting the right people in a room to make a decision on those bigger things as they do come up. So this is a little bit of what our sort of project planning looks like. We use Linear for tracking everything, and so this is our sort of like project template. You'll see there's a lot of details here on the different milestones that are going to be a part of this project. There's on the right-hand side, there's the updates. We use this feature to basically post weekly updates, so you can track along progress and understand sort of like how things are progressing. This all gets piped out to a Slack channel that anyone can be a part of, and so we find this is really helpful for teams like our developer success team who might want to be following along on sort of how our project's going so that they can communicate to customers if timelines might need to adjust or anything like that. And then finally, ship it. We are pretty flexible on exactly what the rollout process looks like. We have some sort of norms in terms of what we follow, but this can really vary just depending on sort of like the size and complexity of whatever feature is being worked on. For some, we'll have a super involved process with maybe multiple feature flags even that we're sort of testing out and gating different steps along the way. We often do something called a bug bash where people on the team internally will all gather, often on a Zoom call, basically try and break something, find as many issues as they can. We find that it's really valuable to have people that didn't build a feature, testing it out, and can uncover a lot of interesting things there. It's also a really great opportunity for our engineers to use our product on a consistent basis that they might not be using in their day-to-day work, and sort of feel some of the developer experience that our customers are going to feel. Sometimes we'll do betas for customers, so working with a dev success team if we need to be getting access to customers early. And then the last piece is we have an all launches channel that the entire company is in, and so engineers will post an update when they launch a feature, talking through what this feature is, why is it valuable, and that can be super helpful for cross-functional teams to get context and identify maybe there's a customer that has been waiting on this, let's go ping them, or marketing wants to do a Feature Friday highlight, for example. So this process works for us. It might work for you as well, or pieces of it might work for you, but I wanted to give a little bit more context on why this works for us, because I think that is really sort of like the most important thing about finding the right process for your team is understanding who your team is and what the norms and culture are, and designing processes that complement the team that you have. So we focus a lot on engineering ownership of execution on projects, project management, product decisions as well. Because of this emphasis, I think this process works well for us because engineers are responsible for a lot of different pieces of sort of moving a project along. And so spending that upfront time on getting alignment on the goals, the motivations for a project, really help engineers sort of understand the why behind what they're building, so that they're able to make more of those decisions day to day and week to week on the project, and able to move more quickly as a result. You'll notice we go really heavy on docs. Our team likes writing docs and using that as a medium for having discussions about architecture decisions, things like that. And so we lean into that and really emphasize sort of that spec phase of figuring out what are the gotchas on this project, what are going to be some of the contentious decisions that we might be making, and getting that upfront alignment. We also have what I would call a fire hose communication culture. So we do a lot of sort of sharing out of information that people can sort of passively be looking through and getting context on things. And so there's a big emphasis on share out to Slack, share out to Slack. That's how our team operates. That's what works for us. And people value getting to see the things that other teams are working on. And so it's a good sort of feedback cycle of wanting to share out work, getting to celebrate the work that others are doing, getting visibility into projects other teams are working on. So with that in mind, and some of the things that we've talked about in terms of how our team builds our processes, but also what is a good amount of process, and how to kind of understand the context of your team and what will work for you. So here are some of the questions I would sort of encourage you to dig into to understand if there are ways that you could be improving process and making it something that is exciting and helpful for engineers on your team, not something that they feel is a burden and a chore to do day to day. I think really understanding kind of what are the problems you're trying to solve. Or is it that teams are having to spend too much time on prioritization because there aren't clear goals and priorities? Is there too much process getting in the way? Have you just gone wild with estimation, and this has become this whole burdensome thing that engineers have to get 100% right? Would it be valuable to actually scale that back a little bit, and would that yield better results? And then I think just making sure that you have sort of the right amount of process to get alignment on why things are being tackled. What is the reason that we're even building this thing? I think that can help engineers think about kind of the decisions they're making with that project along the way. And I think the same goes for the process itself, giving people context on why are we doing this? Why is this helpful? Why should you be spending time, estimating all the details on this project? Why should you be spending time, in our case, of sending out these frequent updates? Giving people that sort of visibility, I think, can be really helpful as well. And then finally, how to land some of these changes effectively. I think continuing to iterate and make improvements is really valuable and important, but can also be taken too far, where you might be overhauling process every quarter, for example, and it can start to feel like whiplash on the team, and people get confused and feel like process isn't actually that important if we're able to overhaul it every quarter. Why do I need to adhere to this process when it's going to change again? So making sure that you're not sort of experimenting too much. And then getting buy-in on the goals of the changes is really important. So making sure that people know, why is something happening. I think that can really help people be motivated to work within these processes. And then try and develop them with your team. Processes should be helpful. They should be making your team better. They should be making it more enjoyable for the engineers to work. In many cases, they should be giving them more sort of ownership over the work that they're doing. And so working with your team to figure those processes out is the best way to go about sort of finding what that right balance is for your team. That's all I had today. So thank you for the time. And again, the slides are up there on the QR code if you want to see some of the examples and templates that I shared. Thanks, everyone.